Hello, I'm Joseph Dillard. Welcome to this, the third in our series on cognitive bias in our IDL video curriculum. In observational selection bias, or what I call the it's everywhere bias, we find a major source of magical thinking. It's a miracle that we met our soulmate, or ran into a neighbor in Tahiti, or survived that crash, or see versions of our new car everywhere, or run into other expecting parents all the time now that we're pregnant, or that our favorite song just came on the radio. It's not that these things are appearing more frequently, it's that we've selected the item in our mind and in turn are noticing it more often. Most people don't recognize this as a selectional bias, but instead believe these events are happening too often to be a coincidence. It must be a message from God. It must be synchronicity. It must be a signal of a greater plan for my life. The way that IDL deals with the it's everywhere bias is again with phenomenology. Fortunately, every character in an interview is unique enough that I haven't ever experienced this bias come up with IDL interviewing. As far as our waking life goes, simply learning about this bias and realizing that it is self-generated magic and mysticism has a way of deflating it. Perhaps we want to stop appearing stupid or naive, or perhaps we just want to stop fooling ourselves. The next cognitive bias is status quo, or what I call the stuck in the mud bias. It's a profoundly conservative bias that says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That is, go to the same restaurants, order the same food, hang out with the same people, read the same sources of news, keep your comfortable family and social scripting. Who doesn't want to stay comfortable? Who wants to risk upsetting the fragile apple cart of their life? Who wants to make waves that may piss off people whose support we need? We humans tend to be apprehensive of change, because change often leads us to make choices that guarantee that things remain the same or change as little as possible. Therefore, we become creatures of habit, stuck in our comfortable discomfort, afraid that if we change, things will be worse. We could also call this the fear of the unknown bias. The next one that I want to mention is the negativity or apocalypse tomorrow bias, which reflects the fact that we tend to give more credibility to bad news. This is probably because, from an adaptational viewpoint, bad news can kill us, while good news doesn't. Media of all varieties play on this bias by cranking out the crisis of the day. The apocalypse tomorrow bias goes beyond our seeming pleasure at scaring ourselves to a drive for certainty and complete control. Vigilance causes us to overestimate danger and underestimate progress. Steven Pinker, in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined, argues that crime, violence, war, and other injustices are steadily declining. Yet most people would argue that things are getting worse. This is a perfect example of the negativity bias at work. Our life issues seem unsolvable because they have been up to now. We generally approach our life issues, nightmares, and dreams with a negative bias. Our nightmares are genuinely scary, and so, of course, they must be negative, warning us of some impending apocalypse. Our dreams in general are nonsensical, so why look at them? IDL deals with the negativity bias by surfacing and tabling that assumption, suspending it for the time being, so as to get the perspective of whatever character we are interviewing. We can always return to scaring ourselves after the interview, if we want to. The next cognitive bias is called the bandwagon effect, or groupthink bias. And it involves regression to a zombified state of life in the matrix. The family scripting we have all been brainwashed and conditioned into since our earliest years, internalizing, is a fundamental and highly effective example of the groupthink bias. Corporate boards, workers, governments, religious and spiritual devotees are all victims of groupthink bias when and if they have become true believers. And this mindset is well laid out by Eric Hoffer in 1951 in his book of the same name, True Believer. Because of our desire to fit in or conform in order to feel accepted, we automatically adopt the groupthink bias. The evolutionary advantages of doing so are clear, in that they provide us with a support system that increases our survival, while providing the group with solidarity that increases its survival. IDL notes that while the convergence of perspectives and recommendations seen over time among interviewed emerging potentials could be seen as a form of groupthink bias, that springs from the fact that we have a limited number of issues, emotions, and basic blocks to accessing our life compass. Identification with the groupthink bias of our emerging potentials is probably a smart thing to do, since it is a form of groupthink that is not determined by our familial or social cultural scripting, but appears to have deep roots in both intimacy and authenticity. Thanks for watching. See you next time.